Everybody says that if you just solve enough puzzles, you will stop blundering in your games. But the problem is so many people solve puzzles the wrong way, and nobody is here to show you how to do them correctly. So today I want to share the 3 most common mistakes I see with puzzle solvings from my students and how you should solve puzzles instead to actually improve your tactical skills and stop blundering in your games. Mistake number 1, which I see way too often, is the trial and error method, which means just you look at a puzzle and you just execute the first move that comes to your mind. Now, sometimes this works. For example, in this puzzle, what is the first move that comes to your mind? Well, you might capture this pawn with a check. Turns out that's even the right move. Right? King f8. Now, what is the first move that comes to your mind? Well, if you give another check, that's not working. Queen f6 is not good. There is a block on the f6 square. Instead, you have to play queen e6. But the problem is that occasionally you will guess the right move and your puzzle rating will go up. But what you did is train a habit that is so detrimental for your real gameplay. Because in your games, it might be that the first obvious move, and it's actually more likely that it is this way, the first obvious move is not working. But actually it just hangs something. Like you might get to a position like this, where again, you can trial and error, right? Your rook is attacked. Maybe you don't even spot that, right? And then you just take on h7. Oh, taking on h7 is not good. Then you take on b7. Taking on b7 is not good again. And then maybe because you're just trying everything, you can capture the knight and you might somehow be surprised that it's correct. You can play queen b8 check and then win the rook. Right? So when you solve puzzles, don't just execute a move the first one you see it. And that's, we'll get later to that, also why I'm not a huge fan of what is called the Woodpecker method, which is so hyped right now, but it has the same problem. When you make moves without fully calculating everything through, you create a habit that is super bad for your games, because you might have realized by now, oh yeah, that's what I do in the games as well. I just play moves if they look good, I don't fully calculate them, and oops, my queen is gone. Not really great. Mistake number 2 that I see way too often is thinking that must be the right move. Now, this works again quite often in puzzles, and that's exactly the problem with the approach. So for example, in this position right here, you're not guessing, you're not just making the first thing, but you're starting to calculate, and you see in this position with white like, rook takes f6 looks good, right? I think it should be the right move. And then instead of calculating through everything, we'll get to the right approach later on, you're just thinking, well, I know it's a puzzle, so I know there must be a solution, and this is a capture. So I'm pretty sure this is it, and you just take on f6, and you might miss whatever the opponent's resource is, but you get the puzzle still right. Again, you build a habit that is not good during the game, because in a puzzle, you know that there's something good. In the game, I see so many students just make a move because they say, this must be good. And again, it just hangs something. It's not how you solve puzzles. So here, instead, you should think through and see all of the options and see that actually rook takes f6 is threatening checkmate. And that is why it is the right move. So if you just try and error, go here, oh, what could it be? Well, I'd probably just take back, right? And then you have the puzzle correct again with the wrong approach. Another good example is this position right here. It's black to move. What is black doing? Now, I will see a lot of people that see queen h4 check, right? Queen h4 check, and then they think, oh, that must be it. King g1, there's checkmate, right? And just immediately without looking for any opponent's resources, they go queen h4 because again, you know that there is a correct solution and you can kind of informed guessing that could be, right? Mistake number 2 is like an informed guess that if there is a right solution, it must be queen h4. The problem here is that there is a nice defensive resource, queen h3, which you probably didn't see at all. The whole point being, if you now take with a knight on h3, you're actually getting checkmated. I want to, let's shortly see. Okay, if you take with the knight on h3, you actually get checkmated on f8, right? So during a game, it might be that you have a very similar position, you play queen h4 check, You get hit by queen h3 and it's absolute disaster, right? You might just straight away lose the game because it was a very nice defensive resource that you missed. Because it's a puzzle, there is something that must be good for black here, and it is this knight g4 check. It's pinned, king is moving, you take on f1, and then you give a checkmate on f2. Again, it's not the right approach, and you will pay in your games later on. Let's look at the last one, which is the must be it thing. So in this position right here, I will see a lot of people, again, that kind of intuitively feel that rook takes b3 is not the right thing. And what can it be? Well, you're not going to run with your king somewhere, push a pawn on the king side. So basically the only thing that really makes sense is pushing this d pawn forward because, well, it's a tactic and maybe this pawn is queenie. The problem is that this move d4, which is the right move right here, only works because this rook is super misplaced. So you should have to calculate first, but instead you're doing this, you're doing this, you're doing this, and now suddenly you realize, well, this would be horrible. You would lose that pawn unless, well, you have rook b1 and then you promote the pawn. So for concrete reasons, this d4 push is good. But if the position is altered just a little bit, if this rook is just on a6, d4 is a bad move, right? So again, you get the wrong habit. Maybe you think, oh yeah, pushing the passed pawn. And then in the game, again, you just blindly push a passed pawn. Oops, this time it doesn't promote. And that's how doing these tactics the wrong ways is really setting up for mistakes during the game. And that's not what we want. The whole point would be to solve tactics to play better, not to play worse. Mistake number 3, and this happens also very often because the ratings are inflated on these puzzle platforms. So what is the mistake? It is solving too hard positions, and that leads to trying to find kind of these brilliant moves during the game. But if you're actually analyzing your games, you might realize, oh, it's usually the simple tactics. It's usually the simple forks, hanging pieces that decide my games. So you're solving one thing, but in your games, you're executing way easier things the wrong way. So for example, you solve tactics online here on Lichess, you get this position right here. Now, this position, I would say, is a pretty difficult position if you had to calculate everything from start to finish. The problem is if you're doing it, with the wrong approach, or if you just know that there is something, it's way easier to do it. So here what you would have to do is calculate king to f5 and see if gaining the opposition is actually leading to something. For example, king g3, king e4, king g2. To me, it wasn't instantly obvious that this is immediately winning for black. And then you have king f5, king e2, king g4, and there is another idea for white, which is e4 pawn breakthrough, but it also turns out it doesn't work. What you also have to see in a real game is the move g5, creating a passed pawn, and why this does not win. Again, not a super easy calculation, especially if you're not super, high rated. So you get these type of positions, and maybe you even get them right. You sit here for 15, 20 minutes. But what this does, if you're doing these positions that are so hard, is that during the game, you get used to thinking about these way too deep things. But again, as mentioned before, what actually decides the games is you're hanging a piece, or you're losing to a fork, or you're missing one single defensive resource from your opponent. Like, it's usually simple stuff. So you want to keep the puzzles at a difficulty that is similar to what you make mistakes in your games right now, and not these super complex, long end games. Now, I'm rated 2068. This is to try out things, right? But you can here adjust the difficulty level, and instead of trying to go for hardest, which is kind of the ego boost, oh, I solved this super hard puzzle, what I recommend instead, we'll get to that, is, if anything, go to easier. Do the simple stuff. The stuff that you actually have to find during games, because these things matter way more. And mistake number 4 is the Woodpecker method. Now, okay, Woodpecker method is a good book, and I find the method itself, the kind of redoing the same set of puzzles, it can be very interesting, right? So I'm not saying that the method itself is bad, but here is the danger with the method. And right now, there is way too much hype about the method, in my opinion. The danger is that when you do the same sets of puzzles over and over again, with the goal to be as quick as possible, what happens again is that you're getting used to playing or executing or thinking about the first move that comes to mind. And because you know the puzzle already, you kind of have a feeling that it should be correct, right? So you're training the habit of making a decision extremely quickly without having considered everything. Now, this is very useful, especially if you're playing blitz chess, right? Where there is a lot of intuition, where there is a lot of quick moving, and if you don't spot it in 2-3 seconds, you don't have time for it, right? So there it can be useful to build up on your fundamentals, to make yourself be quicker at spotting certain tactics. But if you currently, and I see this with so many improvers nowadays, if you have the problem of not considering all your options, of playing moves too quickly, of playing the first move that comes to mind, of not really looking for your opponent's resources, then doing something like the Woodpecker method is making that problem only worse. Instead, what you have to do is to work on your thinking through a decision, coming to a clear conclusion, and only then executing, which is not done if you put yourself under, I need to solve 50 puzzles in 5 minutes, right? That's the same thing with Puzzle Rush and Puzzle Racer, I think it's called on Lead Chess. So these things that put you under pressure, that make you have to make moves that you don't fully calculate, are training something that most likely is currently your problem. So I highly recommend staying away from this if this is something that you realize that loses you games. So how do you do puzzles the right way? There are 3 things that are super important. First of all, keep puzzles simple and easy, at least at the beginning, okay? You want to focus on the things that matter in your games. And for most of you watching this, you lose your games because of simple tactics, so solve simple tactics as well. One way of doing this is, for example, on Lead Chess, you go to puzzles, you can go to themes here, right? And one thing I like a lot, especially with players below 1500, but just in general, to get a feeling of it, you get to this hanging piece segment of the puzzles, and now you're just solving puzzles where there is something hanging. Now, point number 2, instead of just taking the first hanging piece possible, right? Instead of just taking the piece on C3, knowing that it is a puzzle and it must be right, you even know that it should be a hanging piece, you calculate everything until the end and only then execute. So how are we doing it here? We're thinking about queen takes c3. We're thinking about white's ideas. Well, white can take the rook on b2. So you need to think about that, okay? Now you might see there is the pawn on a2 hanging, right? The queen is not here anymore, bishop is not here anymore. So rook takes a2 check, king to b1, and now we take queen takes b2, and it's a checkmate, right? Now you shortly take time. Am I sure about this? Now, key question, would I play this in a game? Now you can say yes. And now you go queen takes c3. Queen c8 check is not something you have to see because the rook is taking, right? So here you see also sometimes, especially in these online puzzle tools, the solution is a little bit weird, right? It's kind of what is best according to the computer very often, but not what is the most critical. What should you have seen, which is this: bishop takes b2, rook takes a2, king b1, queen takes b2, and it's a checkmate, right? You've seen everything and you can execute. Next one, right? So you get to this position right here, and again, we do the right process. I see it again, times and times again. What are people doing? Just taking this rook immediately, right? Rook is hanging, we do hanging pieces, take it. Oh, let's consider what else we can do, right? We could give a check on e8 as well, for example, right? That's not a move that you can just immediately think, no, this is not working. And now we need to start calculating. Queen takes a1 check. What are white's options? White can play king e2 or knight d1, okay? And in both of these lines, you need to see something important. Otherwise, queen takes a1 might be a problem, okay? So queen takes a1, king to e2. Now, your queen is hanging, And if you're just taking the rook, then queen takes h8 is checkmate. So in a real game, if you just take on a1, it might turn out instead of winning 2 rooks, you're getting checkmated. Not very good. So queen takes a1, king e2. Now you might see the idea that you play rook e8 at this point. You give a check, get the rook away from the attack from the queen, and then in the next move, you can capture the rook on g1. So that is very good for black. Now, we don't execute yet. We need to see something else. Queen takes a1. Knight to d1 is blocking the check. There is no rook hanging. Now you might see, oh, then the queen on f6 is hanging, right? So now we've seen queen takes a1 check, both white's defensive resources. We found something we like, and we can now execute queen takes a1. Rook e8, very important, and queen takes g1. Right? This is how you solve puzzles the right way. And I just realized I haven't said the third part of the right puzzle solving, which is try to adjust and try to put yourself under time pressure from time to time. Right? So one of the ways that puzzles is also easier is you can stare at the position for 20 minutes. Right? Now let's imagine that you're playing rapid. Right? So you're playing 15 minutes game plus 10 seconds. Now in a 15-minute game, it's not smart to spend 10 minutes on one single move. So I would say the maximum is kind of like 3-4 minutes, right? Which is already quite a lot. So what you can do when solving puzzles, again, keep them easy and then say, I put myself a timer of 3 minutes, and after 3 minutes, I have to take a decision. It might not be the right one, but I have to take a decision that is good enough for a game. So like this, you put yourself in the game situation. This is really the key takeaway from this video that you hopefully will realize that when you solve puzzles, what you want to do is to improve your in-game play. So how do you have to solve puzzles? You need to make the situation as close as possible to a real game, because only like this you train the skills that you need in the game. And what most of you do, and what is encouraged online by all the puzzle rating and the boasting about it and whatsoever, is to train puzzles to get better at solving puzzles. And that's not what we want to do. We want to train puzzles to get better at finding tactics during the game. So to summarize, when solving puzzles online, do not try and error or just think, oh, this must be it, that's the move. Instead, fully think through every single decision as if it would be a game. Point number 2, don't take 20 minutes on a single position if you only play rapid and during a game you have 3 to 4 minutes, right? You can time yourself, put yourself under a little bit of pressure. Don't do it with 5 seconds where you just have to not think properly, but put yourself under pressure, but that you have enough time to think like during a game. And then point number 3, and that's super important, and that's the only way that actually the under pressure works, is keep the positions rather simple, especially if you look at your games and you blunder pieces left and right. Then work on the hanging pieces, work on the simple stuff, a little pin, a little fork, right? Work on these things so you can implement them better, maybe even a little bit under time pressure in your games. But it's always important to keep the calculation properly, to think through every single decision and not go into this mode of like, oh, I'll just test the first move that comes to my mind, because that in real games is leading to absolute catastrophes. And if you want to take your chess to the next level and work even smarter on your puzzles, on your game analysis, on everything that is needed in chess, make sure to check out my course, Simplified Chess Improvement System. That's it from my side. If you have any questions, make sure to put them in the comments below. Like the video, subscribe to not miss any future videos, and see ya in the next one. Bye!